and welcome everybody. You are listening to the voice of Free Arcadia, and we've got a great episode today. We've got a new face with us, so I'm super happy about that. But beforehand, let's say hello as always to one of our most welcome guests on the panel, Julian Peru.
Hello. I have a guest myself, as you can see.
I can see that, a very special one. What's their name?
Farah.
Also joining us today, a very special guest, Mercury Falcon, also known as John. John, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
John has a fantastic YouTube channel under the same name, Mercury Falcon there. You just hit 10,000 subs, right?
Yeah, super excited.
That's awesome. Lots of awesome retro anime content there. So I'm guessing if you're into Leijiverse on Facebook, you're going to be into Mercury Falcon on YouTube. And Leijiverse getting close to our first 100. So we're about less than 1%, about 0.1% of the way to where you are. We'll get there.
Yeah.
Thanks. Very excited to be back on track and to be able to talk with my friends about a very interesting series here today. This series is kind of an attempt to reboot the entire Leijiverse with some new fresh blood instead of, the Leijiverse constantly recycling all of these ideas, and it breeds a bit of familiarity, which I definitely appreciate. But Cosmo Warrior Zero takes an interesting approach in giving us some new characters infused with that in a new storyline that I really appreciate. But opinions are not unanimous on this one, so we may have some spicier takes on what this series is about, and hopefully that will result in something that's a lot more grounded, that we can talk really objectively about what Cosmo Warrior Zero is, and that's exactly what we're talking about today. Cosmo Warrior Zero. It first aired in July 26, 2001 on TV Tokyo, but it is actually based on a PlayStation 1 game that we never got here in the West, under the same title, released in May of 2000. And this is kind of a very interesting way for an anime to start. Apparently sales were good enough to legitimize a 15-episode season of an anime. Feel free, anybody, maybe Julian, you could chime in here and give us some more context, because you've got a great article on this series on your website, triple-9.fr.
Yeah, so yeah, indeed, it started as a video game, and behind these video games, there's a man, a video game producer called, or known under the pseudonym Dr. Serial Nishioka. He became part of Leiji Matsumoto's inner circle somewhere around 1998, and at that point, he basically managed to pitch. He was working for Taito, a big video game company in Japan, and he pitched the idea of a game set in the Leijiverse with characters old and new, basically fighting it out with a new storyline. And it features as its main character a new character called Warrius Zero, who is a commander of a ship, and he's tasked with hunting the space pirates. So that's Arloc, that's Emeraldas, that's Tochiro, that we know and love.
Primarily Harlock, right? He's sent after Harlock specifically. We'll get more into the plot, but yeah.
Yeah, it's just in the game, you basically, it's like a fighting game. So you fight a series of enemies and
third-person shooter.
It alternates. You have this third-person kind of levels where you just have to find the exit and shoot everything that shows in front of you. And once you've done that, you have a sort of boss battle, which is in a 3D arena. It's a bit like Power Stone, if you played that.
Power Stone, okay.
And you need to defeat the enemy you have in front of you. So and it introduced a whole new gallery of characters that we find later in the anime.
Yeah,
like La Sylviana, who is a bounty hunter, who is also hunting Arloc. So she butts head with Zero. You have a Grenadier who is a soldier mercenary. You have this plot that's a bit different from the anime.
Sure.
You have the sort of main beat, which is that Zero realizes that actually Arloc is being set up by the metanoids.
Yeah, they kind of team up eventually. And I want to dig more into what happens in the plot specifically soon. But John, you were talking a bit more about, you had some very specific insight on an important figure that kind of helped create this, along with a lot of other sort of retro anime reboots around the same time.
I was looking into Akira Subaraya, who's the son of Eiji Subaraya, the special effects guy behind Godzilla and the creator of Ultraman. His son, of all people, in the 90s started his own production company and did like a slew of really schlocky late night TV shows, as well as like really schlocky movies that were usually inspired by or licensed actually from manga or video games. Like he did Skull Soldier, which was kind of a knockoff of Ishinomori's Skullman. And then in 97, a little bit later, he did a straight up Shin Megami Tensei TV show. And it's really schlocky, really bad special effects.
You had some of the 3D animation of that on your Twitter. Go check out Mercury Falcon's Twitter there too if you want to see a little bit more of that. You're working on an episode about this. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's why I wanted to watch Cosmo Warrior Zero, and that's why I watched a lot of the shows he did, because I wanted to get a grasp of it. Because I knew that towards the end it got really bad. And I wanted to see, like, where did it start off? Because his Leiji Matsumoto stuff starts off, it's pretty decent. Like, it's not like I've seen the Gun Frontier anime, and it's a decent anime. Like, I didn't think there was anything wrong with it.
Yeah, especially for the time, right? Because this is all being created right around the time the 90s anime bubble is bursting and budgets are plummeting. Do I have that right?
Yeah, and pretty much all animation outside of like major productions, there's so many productions going on that all animation is being outsourced to South Korea at this point, and they're using digital animation to take any shortcuts they can, because they just got to get stuff on TV. And so Akira Subaraya, he started off doing OVAs like the Queen Emeraldas and Maetel Legend, and then this was his first show for TV. And there's like a noticeable difference, like you budget an OVA differently than you budget a TV series. And it felt like he really stretched that budget that they had.
Yeah, I mean, they already had invested. We were talking about they did a video game first. So there were art assets there. There was world already created. A lot of that upfront investment maybe didn't need to be spent there, but yeah, I can see they were cutting corners anywhere they could, and I think we'll get to more of that in a bit. It was directed by Kazuyoshi Yokota, who also directed Maetel Legend, and really beyond these Leijiverse projects, I was looking at his record. I mean, the most notable things that I saw he did about 10 storyboards. 10 episodes worth of storyboards for The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Swiss Family Robinson animes. And that's really like the most notable thing that he did throughout his career. Other than that, it's a few directed episodes here and there, a few storyboarded episodes here and there. Not much. Stop me if you recognize any of these names. Produced by Shunji Namiki, who produced about 5 animes total that I could find, including Kaleido Star, which is about gymnasts, and Fortune Dogs, which is about dogs. So, this team didn't really have a lot of other notable stuff under their belt from what I can see, at least the most prevalent creators on the team.
Right. And that was another issue with the bubble in 2000, was that because so many anime were in production, they were picking people wherever they could find them to do jobs. There were, there's a lot of stories, not necessarily on Matsumoto stuff, but on other productions where they were taking people as young as 22, 23 years old who had only just gotten into the industry and going, here, you got to be director because we need someone to direct this.
And even the opposite is true, too. Some of these guys were like super old heads, but they never really took off in their careers. Mm-hmm. So they're getting work just picking up wherever they can, too. Because like I said, Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Swiss Family Robinson, he did a lot of stuff, but never really burst like some other creators have talked about.
And the studio that did Cosmo Warrior Zero was called Vega Entertainment. And they were at the time relatively young company. They were founded, I think, in 1996, and they had mostly done OVA work. So I think for them, it was also their first TV series. And it was a very special kind of production because it was on originally, the very, very first channel it was aired on was called ATX, basically a satellite channel. And ATX wanted to have this slot on a certain hour, I don't know exactly when, which they call the basically manga grandmaster hour. And it was shows based on some older manga writers. So you had some Go Nagai, some Monkey Punch, and so on. But you get a sense, I've seen a few of these shows, and you get a sense that they were done really on a shoestring budget.
Yeah. So was that not TV Tokyo?
It's a subsidiary of TV Tokyo, actually.
Okay.
But what he's talking about is really interesting because a lot of those were Akira Subaraya shows. Like he did an adaptation of Ishinomori's Genma Wars, which he also made pretty schlocky. And then there was I think Demon Lord Dante, which was also the Go Nagai one. And then this wasn't him, but I think the Monkey Punch one you're talking about, I think is Gundo Musashi, which is one of the most infamously bad anime ever made.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So Cosmo Warrior Zero was not really set up for success here, it seems.
To be fair, Cosmo Warrior Zero was one of the earliest ones. So right. It was comparatively, it's not like as bad as some of those later stuff.
It makes sense. They kind of deteriorated over time.
These other series were not made by Vega Entertainment. Vega Entertainment did Cosmo Warrior, Gun Frontier, Submarine Super 99. They got better little by little. And the other series were done by other studios.
That's true, yeah.
And Vega managed, maybe because there was Dr. Serial Nishioka, who was a huge Matsumoto fan, and there was Keisuke Masunaga, who was a character designer, who was also a long-time collaborator of Matsumoto. So they really tried to basically make it right, even with their limited means. And I think that's what made a big difference in the end.
Yeah,
that's true, because I do know that like those other after I think Vega they did Cosmo Warrior Zero, and then the next show that took the time slot was Babel the Second, and they did the animation for those two. But after that, Vega kind of left that time slot and did their own thing, and Akira Subaraya moved on to using other studios like ENG Films and other some lower budget kind of production houses.
And I think we talked a little bit about him, but it was written by Dr. Serial Nishioka. And this is quite likely seems like a pseudonym or something going on here. He also wrote Gun Frontier, Maetel Legend, Space Symphony Maetel, all of which are successful or less so, depending on who you ask. But, at least true to the Matsumoto storytelling ethos there. It was just 5 minutes ago if you mentioned it, but yes, Julian, if you're watching the video, what are you holding up?
So this is volume 15 of Galaxy Express 39, French edition. In this volume, at the end, Tetsuro and Maetel arrive on a planet called Technologia, and basically the governor of Technologia is Dr. Serial Nishioka. He's known under this name, and basically Matsumoto made him a character in his universe, which is a pretty big honor. So they really must have gotten along pretty well. We also one of the most prolific people to actually touch this series and a few other Leijiverse reboot animes is Keisuke Masunaga. And this is a very famous name who worked on Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon, and Pokemon, which are quite possibly three of the biggest anime to ever touch Western shores. So you'd be very remiss if you didn't know who this person is by now. He's done character design for many Matsumoto projects. And what I love about what he did for the Leijiverse specifically is honor the master's style, honor Leiji Matsumoto's varying loose brush style throughout all of these character designs, which was quite the monumental task. When you're talking about animation, you want those stroke widths to be mono width, generally pretty thin, because
that makes production easier. But he totally went against convention here just to honor Matsumoto's style.
Well, I think Matsunaga is the best, apart from maybe I'm drawing a blank.
ARCADIA of my youth's character designer.
Legendary. But apart from him, the Matsunaga is, I think, the best character designer to have touched Matsumoto's work. And he remains a very close collaborator to Matsumoto. Anytime a new anime project is announced, it's always Matsunaga, almost always Matsunaga doing the character design. He did the covers for the official Matsumoto fan club magazine. And he's really, he's part of the family, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it is because we're so close to losing that original Matsumoto style. And, something we may never see anybody try again, to be that romantic with the way he drew his characters. He keeps that tradition alive. Another notable person on the cast is, for Americans, for those of us listening to it in English, Steve Blum, who don't have to talk too much about Steve Blum because we all know him from Spike as Cowboy Bebop, Roger Smith and Big O, Mugen and Samurai Champloo. But you know what? Just because I mentioned him, I'll give you something you might not have known. He was also Prometheus on Prometheus and Bob on Kablam in America. So that's a little fun fact for the kids at home, if you remember Kablam on Nickelodeon. The main character, also Warrius Zero, later appears in Dimensional Voyage, which is Koichi Shimaboshi's manga reboot of Captain Harlock, but not really just Captain Harlock, because he seems to work in literally every single Leijiverse character that ever existed into this manga. So he does have a brief appearance there.
Yeah. And in fact, I think Dr. Serial Nishioka kind of started this fashion of putting characters from various, creating some continuity between works that was not necessarily here, because he was such a huge fan that for Cosmo Warrior Zero, he went back and found some aquatic machine men from an obscure manga, and he brought them back into that. In Gun Frontier, he went and found the Shadow Master, I don't know what he's called in English, but the big bad behind the scenes, which briefly appears in the final episode. He went and found him in another of Matsumoto's period manga, and he imported him. You can see that he was such a huge fan that he knew all these characters and say, I can connect this to that and create some links here.
It's not impossible with any two characters in the Leijiverse. They all operate on the same Ring of Time principle that we have. And you even outlined some connections I wasn't even thinking about with Warrius Zero. While we're on the topic of Warrius Zero, what did you notice about his character and the connections he may have to the greater Leijiverse?
The big thing with Warrius Zero is that, especially when the video game was being released, it was in Japanese, there were a lot on the internet, lots of rumors about what it was about. And one of the biggest stories in the fan base was that Warrius Zero was actually, would turn out to be Tetsuro's father, basically Faust from Adieu Galaxy Express.
Yeah, the sort of Darth Vader Leijiverse analog.
And they do have a very similar backstory, sort of a commander, a military man that we know Tetsuro's father was supposed to have been, friend with Arloc, eventually, battle comrade, the brother in arms, and
in Adieu Galaxy Express, Harlock and Faust share a drink together before Faust goes off to try and take down Tetsuro, and it's sort of stated that they had this bond, and Faust was a military man and Harlock was a pirate, and they just weren't destined to ever work together. And it's so interesting when I read that on your site, Julian, I never made the connection before. So even today, I'm finding out new little fun things.
The watch with a portrait.
Oh, okay.
Which is very similar to the one Faust and Tetsuo, but it's not exactly the same design. So clearly, it was intended to be a sort of parallel. But having played the video game and knowing a bit more about the story of the video game, it's not a plot point in the video game. Warrius Zero is not revealed to be Faust in the end.
That happens later, yeah. But it's fun for us who know so much about the Leijiverse to kind of speculate on that. John, did you have something to say?
No, I didn't know about that connection there. I think it's really interesting. It sounds like a lot of comparisons I have to like the what they've done with Ishinomori. Like going back to talking about the character designs, I think that's one of the strong points of this show is that even if I make fun of the animation, if you look at the stills, the art is great, and that those thick lines are incredible. Similar to how you said that they always have this one character designer come back for Leiji Matsumoto stuff. It's kind of the same with Cyborg 009, or rather Ishinomori stuff in the 2000s, where they got Naoyuki Kono, who did the character designs for Android Kikaider's TV series and the Cyborg 009. And then like, he is just the guy you want to get because he always he doesn't try to draw them in his own style. He draws them in like his version of Ishinomori style. And it's like the most faithful version of those character designs.
Yeah, even with like the Star Blazers reboot, you have a lot of people who lament a lot of people say moe style that they gave to all the characters, and it's not quite as Matsumoto as some people would like, even though Matsumoto didn't do it. He only did one character design actually from beginning to end, and that was Dr. Sato. There's something lacking when you try to modernize these old characters too much.
Mm-hmm.
And for the Star Blazers reboot, they also had the constraints that they could not be too close to Matsumoto's style.
Right. There's lots of issues
involved.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He's being added back to the credits now in the newer ones from everything I've heard. So they're bonding, they're mending, it seems.
That's good news. And in fact, on the team of Yamato 2199, you find actually Keisuke Masunaga, but as an animation director.
Oh, interesting.
Not doing character design, but he's still somewhere in this orbit.
Somebody who really understands the spirit is touching that series, and that's really important. Well, let's talk about the themes. And I think theme number one, the most important theme of this show, is PTSD. This is a theme that exists in plenty of Matsumoto works. I mean, we've talked over and over again about how inspirational doesn't feel like the right word to use for it, but I think it is. The occupation of America in Japan was to all of Leiji Matsumoto's works. This left a profound impact personally, what he saw around him, what he believed about society, how he expressed himself through his archetypes. But I think Cosmo Warrior Zero has some pretty brutal displays of PTSD, even more than, I think the closest would be Yamato sometimes. But this really digs in. What do you guys think about, John, what do you think about PTSD in this series? Did you notice anything that really stuck out?
I did, and it frustrated me because they always tend to have the characters do these weird flashbacks where they have they show you a bunch of shots, but I feel like it's always something where a character it feels like it comes out of nowhere. It's, in my opinion, it's just not executed well enough that you understand exactly what's going on, because there's the scene where the woman who sends Harlock on the mission, who turns out to be a machine person.
I think they're called the chairman or the chairwoman.
Okay. Yeah, she has like a scene where she just out of nowhere, we see flashes of like her past, and it's just, and then like she like pulls out a gun and shoots a robot boy, and it's all done like in quick succession that you don't get what's going on. And I felt like they needed to execute a scene like that a bit better.
I think that's interesting, and one of the best parts of having you on this specifically, and you were worried about it at first, but I think it's really important, is that how is Cosmo Warrior Zero loyal to old fans, but also possibly scaring off potentially new fans of the Leijiverse, where I saw that scene and it all clicked with me because I'm starting to get I've seen Cosmo Warrior Zero like the most of any Leijiverse thing. It's just how it is. It's the most available for me. I'm getting, oh yeah, she's a machine person. She gave up her body. She's freaked out by it. She's regretting it, and she's freaking out. But for somebody who's not so inundated, maybe that's a little sporadic.
One thing maybe to keep in mind is that at the time, in Japan at least, the second run of Galaxy Express 39 was being published. Matsumoto was drawing it. And actually, in many ways, Cosmo Warrior Zero connects to that. So Technologia appears first in Galaxy Express 39, then becomes a major stake in Cosmo Warrior Zero. And so you, at least in Japan, fans of Matsumoto came, I think, to Cosmo Warrior Zero as being a sort of spin-off of Galaxy Express. Whereas we were talking about it, but in France, that's a French DVD box, all the marketing is around Arloc, basically.
Yeah, what does that say there?
Because it says, so La Jeunesse d'Albator, so basically Arloc's youth. But they really put him in the title, and it's not technically false. I mean, there is young Arloc in the series, but he's not the main character. He's not the hero. The story is not does not revolve around him.
And it's interesting you mentioned the 3-9 tie-in, where we do get Maetel in this series for a couple of episodes in different continuities, and we'll talk about the last two Gaiden episodes, as they're called, which are a total cluster, but enjoyable for the deepest Matsumoto fans. So it's interesting, how are they trying to bring people in, but are they just too scared to rely on their own character to really use the thing and market the thing? Are they too scared that Warrius isn't a strong enough character to bring in, or if he's too old school Showa to really captivate a new audience? There's some pussyfooting going on around here with what they want to do with this thing. And
I think there's a lot of inexperience as well in terms of plotting, in terms of pacing the story,
animation,
making 13 episodes of the story. I think it really shows how green the team is, and they really get better in Gun Frontier and then Submarine Super 99.
Another big theme here, connected to the PTSD, is moving forward after loss, and in some ways a sort of rebirth. One of the rebirth things that are here that's a little weirder is the fact that Mariana Oki, who turns out to be the first mate of Warrius Zero, looks exactly like his dead wife. This is a bit strange, but it doesn't feel entirely foreign to the Leijiverse, but they end up kind of having a relationship. How did you feel about the relationship between Warrius Zero and Mariana, John?
So here's the problem I have with it, is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I'm not remembering the show right, but I don't think they show any scenes of Warrius Zero with his family. He says he has a wife and kids. We never see them. So
they're in the locket.
Yeah. Okay. So we never see any scene with him and his kids. We never see any scene with him and his wife. And it's like, I'm supposed to understand that he has this connection with his wife, and that this is something that's now being, a lot of emotions are being drawn back by Oki, but like, I never got to see what the connection between your wife and your kids was.
Yeah, it's definitely absent.
Yeah, and Marina is not a character that actually exists in the video game.
Okay.
In the video game, it's actually El Matia, the antagonist, the metanoid agent provocateur who is pulling the strings behind the scenes, who is actually looking exactly like Zero's lost wife, and that creates a lot of conflict for him. But it's hinted that she took that look on purpose to mess with him, basically. So
kind of like a Maetel thing there,
sort of reverse Maetel in a way.
Yeah.
In the show, they decided to basically split that into two different characters. But they could have basically skipped the whole Marina looks exactly like my dead wife angle, because it didn't really bring anything to the table. The fact that he falls in love with a woman who is actually
it speeds up the love there. I think maybe that's its only purpose, which is kind of shallow.
But it's much, the fact that if he finds love, a new love with a woman who is actually a machine woman and someone he would have considered an enemy before is much more interesting than the fact that she looks pretty much like his dead wife. But
yeah, is the enemy called the metanoids? Because we've talked about this before. The metanoids kind of being the overall antagonist force in the Leijiverse after, like, in the mid 80s to present day. So are they called the metanoids in the video game?
In the video games, they are, as I remember, identified as being the metanoids. In Cosmo Warrior Zero, I think that never names them that way. But yeah, it's really if you've been reading Galaxy Express 39, the manga in parallel, you know who Elmatia is and what she's doing there. And but yeah, it's one of these things, like, as you said, if you're not already kind of into the Leijiverse, it goes right above your head.
Yeah, I mean, it's not critical info. You kind of get, okay, there's an antagonist there. I don't need to know about the metanoids to connect to it, because obviously I didn't know about them till probably half a year ago when you mentioned them to me, because it's just not available widely in English, anything with the metanoids. Another big concept here we have going on is coexistence and xenophobia. And this kind of a flip from where we'd been in the Leijiverse for so long. Like I said, the American occupation of Japan informing Matsumoto's work so much. We have enemy after enemy that's basically, in Arcadia in my youth, we have the Illumidas, who are these overly hairy people kind of looking like me. If I don't shave long enough, my eyebrows will connect to my beard too. And that's his expression there, and the resistance to being a machine man. But now we're seeing more of a, if you can't beat him, join him sort of deal. And also an acknowledgement that not every individual machine man is responsible for the overall attack on the Earth.
I thought that the show had a good, I like what it was trying to say. And I felt like the character, not necessarily Zero, but there's the one guy on his crew who's like, they go on the mission to Gun Frontier, and he realizes that he becomes friends with the machine man. Like that.
Sorry, John, what was that?
I think he's called Ishikawa or something.
Ishikawa,
like that.
yeah. I liked his arc where he's very against the machine men, and then they go on the mission to Gun Frontier, and he becomes close friends with the one guy, the one machine man. My problem was that they also tried to do a similar arc with Zero, I felt like. And the thing is that from the start, he never comes off as being xenophobic. In fact, in like this first or second episode, he's like, make peace. You guys don't fight, make peace. Don't fight with each other like this. But then later on, there's the scene where he's accepting Oki for being a machine person, and it feels like he's overcoming a xenophobia, but he never had xenophobia. He was always pretty level-headed. And so,
well, I guess there's a difference there between being a friend with somebody and being a lover with somebody. And there's those are different levels of intimacy that you have to kind of get over. So whilst he was already ready to be befriending somebody, not only was he getting over the loss of his wife, but compound that with, this woman looks just like my wife, compound that with, she's actually a machine person who I lost my wife to. I mean, I could understand at least a little bit of reservation.
I can get that. But I felt like Ishikawa's arc in that show honestly should have been put on Zero. In fact, that's an issue I have with the show overall, is that I felt like Zero was in that captain's chair the whole show while his men were doing all these things. And it's like, I want to see Zero go down to Gun Frontier, and they try to, maybe he has an issue with the machine men, and he goes down, and then he becomes friends, and he's like, I'm sorry, He
kind of does that with, well, yeah, not so much with the machine man, but it's interesting. Ishikawa's kind of fulfilling that Tadashi Daiba role, right? So, and Tadashi Daiba ends up having to do a lot of this out and about learning sort of on the field mission, right? Whereas having the captain out and about, where in Star Blazers even, they kind of drop the ball with this. They constantly have like their first mate putting their life in direct danger constantly. And Ishikawa even later on says, hey, I'm the most expendable. It makes sense for him to be on the ground. That's how I saw it.
So yeah, it makes sense from a military perspective, but I felt like I wanted to see Zero actually like do like,
sure.
I wanted to see him boots on the ground doing more stuff.
And I think for the anime, they really tried to establish Zero as really opposite to Arloc. Like Arloc cannot forgive the machine man, so he continues attacking their ships. Arloc is always going himself to fight, and always and Arloc is very intense, basically. And Zero, interestingly, is not that at all. He actually forgives from the start. He gets over his grief. He never lets hatred guide him. He doesn't have this darkness inside him.
He self-hates. That's the thing. He loathes himself at the beginning.
Yeah, he has he's not kirking it out. So basically, he's not going on all the away missions. He leaves his men to do. He has much more responsible role as a captain. So it's not as exciting. But it since the show is about Zero and Arloc and showing them how different they are, I think that's what they were going for, basically.
Yeah, and in Leijiverse, we have these military dramas. We have this kind of like young rogue on a vagabond journey stories, and then we have Harlock's pirate ship sort of stories. And people who are more familiar with one or the other oftentimes go, why isn't the character acting more like Arloc? Why isn't the character, like, even between Galaxy Express and Galaxy Railways, people will watch Galaxy Express and then go into Galaxy Railways and they get blindsided because this is a military drama. There's procedural things going on here all the time. What happened to my vagabonds? And it can be confusing if you're not really deep in the Leijiverse. So I love that you're pointing these things out, John, because this is a big deal. This becomes an issue when you try to invite people into this world. It's like, what is going on? Everything's not congruent. Well, there's some reasons. Whether or not they're good reasons, that's up to the watcher. And in this coexistence sort of theme, we have a harmony of the elements being brought up here. And I would theorize that we have the four major elements being brought into harmony, with Zero being air, Marina being water, the Karyu, the fire dragon, it's called, that's the name, the fire, and Harlock and the Death Shadow being earth. And how are these four elements going to exist together? And it really comes down to, how do we bring out the fire in this situation? And we get that by the end, only by the interaction and cooperation of each of the other elements.
And there should be probably metal, or is it wood? But it says the Asian elements are not the same ones. There are actually 5.
Oh, okay. Okay, so maybe I'm missing something there as well. But a lot of European influence on Matsumoto and his storytelling there. So maybe it's there, maybe it's not. I could look deeper. Another big theme we have here, and it's what we've been talking about, was Zero versus Harlock, law versus lawlessness. Which approach is correct? And it always seems to end up being, well, both are correct. They're all part of the Yamato. The Yamato meaning the Great Harmony. It takes all of these different ideologies to work against, but also with each other to get the result that is best. Well, what did you think about that, John? That law versus lawlessness. Who's right? Who's wrong?
I didn't really think about that as a theme watching this, because I don't know. It feels like Warrius Zero delves into the lawlessness himself.
It's true.
More often than I was expecting him to.
Yeah, it's kind of like, how do you move forward after being in this strict military force and you've been stricken down and you're cooperating under this force that you don't really agree with? You do kind of have to bend a little bit too.
It's really like, I haven't seen as much Leijiverse stuff as you, but it always felt like it's always interesting because there's this weird respect for military and mixed with this love of anarchy.
Yeah. Matsumoto's father being a pilot in World War II and apparently flying over the Yamato as it exploded, and feeling the force of that from the air, and then never flying again, never taking another military job or even a commercial flying job. And I always see that as having a bit of an influence on the Harlock character, a sort of fatherly figure there. But then there's a little bit of anarchy that you want there too, because right, you're suffering under the American force occupation there, and it makes you probably have to work around the law at that point, even to survive in some way.
And in fact, that's very interesting what you say about law and lawlessness, because at various points of the show, you see a sort of back and forth between that, even on Gun Frontier or Heavy Melder, which is the far west kind of planet. And it seems like it's every man for himself, and there's only outlaws. And then there's this huge law that if you destroy a man's alcohol, you're basically you're done. And so that's very funny, because you see that no, there is some sort of sacred law that even the outlaws abide to its alcohol. And it's funny because at the end of the series, when Technologia comes into play, and Technologia is a planet that brings opposites together, basically. It's a planet where flesh and blood humans and machine people decided they wanted to live together. That's explored a bit more in the Galaxy Express manga. It's actually an artificial planet. Since they could not find their place in the universe, they built it. They built a planet where they could live together free from hatred, which also is very Matsumoto thing. Like, you build the Arcadia, basically. You build your paradise. When you think about it, both the human government and the machine government, they want to destroy that planet. They don't want this planet to exist. And it takes a fleet of outlaws, which Zero himself has become at this point, even if it maybe does not realize it fully. But yes, he joins this fleet of outlaws, and in a way, to protect this new balance, to protect this new peace, this new society, he must become an outlaw in the eye of the old world, basically. And that's a very Matsumoto thing.
Yeah, even in Yamato, there's this constantly kind of bending the rules, reality, just to get what needs done. It doesn't fit in that tight structure, but to operate these big ships, a lot of times it seems there does need to be a little bit of law and order, whereas, the Arcadia has a crew of 40 thieves, and probably a lot of automated things because Tochiro's an absolute genius. There's a lot more people from what it seems like on the Karyu, and that sort of lawlessness isn't going to work so well with a crew of hundreds.
You might even remember that in Arloc, there's a scene when Daiba complains that it's anarchy about the ship, and he expected something more organized.
Right.
But when combat starts, everyone is like, throw away what they were doing, and suddenly it is on. So.
Unless Yadaran doesn't think he needs to involve himself. And we'll talk a little bit about Yadaran, who makes an appearance here, an interesting appearance. And really, I mean, this kind of plays into what we were talking about with law and lawlessness, but government corruption also rears its ugly head here. And Matsumoto, not a big pro-government guy, it seems, from a lot of his depictions of the government. John, how do you feel about the government and the Leijiverse from what you've seen and what you saw in Cosmo Warrior Zero?
It really makes you understand where Harlock is coming from, because you can look at someone like that and think of him as the bad guy. No, he's it seems like it kind of has like Gundam has some stuff like this, and of course Gundam was inspired by a lot of Leiji Matsumoto's work, where there's no good guy and bad guy. Everyone is just trying to fulfill their own agenda. And that's what I really liked, is that it doesn't pull punches with that, especially where like you even see that in Cosmo Warrior Zero with the chairwoman and what happens to her.
Let's talk about let's go into that technical aspect of Cosmo Warrior Zero now. The animation, the art, the music. Like we said, this is released right after the bubble popped in the 90s. And animation tweens, the in-between animation, sometimes it's just not there. Sometimes we're just seeing key animation. I remember, I think in episode 1 or 2, when Zero's playing chicken basically with Harlock and the engines fail and they have to turn the ship, and we see the ship basically go like super juddery. It's like, oh, okay, I guess we didn't have the budget for this.
That's episode 1, so that's right of the bat.
Yeah.
Say, okay.
Sometimes we're just not going to do it. And we have a lot of, this was heavily digitized. I think John mentioned that. And digital animation was used. And objects are just moving so flatly across the screen. Animation errors are abound. We have things, not being colored properly. Sometimes we're seeing objects moving across the screen that will pop out of existence before they completely get off screen. Like, this is reminding me of watching bad Flash animation in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I thought exactly that. It felt like really like you said, there's the scene where they dump they go to the planet and they see the dumping bodies. And they're like these white, there's no detail, and they're these like CG ragdolls kind of.
They're not even ragdolls, because ragdolls have physics. Yeah. They're just they're paper dolls. They're not ragdolls, they're paper dolls.
And there's tons of stuff like that. I think that they had, since it was done digitally, I think they had like folders with assets for characters. Because there's sometimes where characters are facing one way and it looks like they just took a head from another shot and put it on a body, because like the proportions will be a little off. I have one particular screenshot where Zero's eyes look like they're on the wrong sides of his faces because his eyelashes are going inwards. And it makes me think like they must have had like a folder that had eyes in it, and they just dragged the eyes onto the face, but they put them on the wrong spots.
One thing I've always suspected, I have no confirmation of that, so maybe I'm wrong, is that probably Dr. Serial Nishioka for this project brought a lot of people from the video game scene, basically people. And I think what you describe here is really a kind of mindset you'd find in video game with like 2D layers being combined on screen. And I think that's part of the reason Cosmo Warrior Zero has these sort of defects. Most of the team was not actually coming from a traditional animation background, but really more from a video game background.
We have this like super heavily digitized animation, but once in a while we get these 3D models for the ships that actually don't look too terrible. I mean, we can compare it to the Yamato reboot where they have flat colored 3D models and they'll actually hand draw all the line work for them on top of it. That's a whole another level with a way bigger budget. But even what we have here seems passable. I guess it was just too expensive to use these more often, because we could have been saved. Like I said, there's a ship that rotates like a stuttering clock. And why couldn't we have just rotated a 3D model in space? Frustrated.
It's part of that whole thing where in still images of this show mostly look pretty fine. It's in motion where you see the flaws.
Right. And that's a big point of this problem that we have here. The art direction is good to great, and the animation is bad to good. Sometimes it's good, but usually it's mediocre, and it swings into bad more often, I think.
And I think that regarding the CG elements, it was not that common at the time to have that in Japanese animation. Studio Gonzo was out there and doing some stuff using CG very extensively. That's my gut feeling, is that's where the video game background shows. That at some point someone on the team said, why don't we just do it in 3D? It would be so much simpler. And the idea comes after 3 episodes basically of doing it the old-fashioned way, and they say, you know what, we know how to do 3D, let's do 3D.
Yeah, the video game background seems to be prevalent in a lot of ways, because it's like, well, because a lot of times, at least in the like 2000s, early 2000s, people are like, well, we need to show what's happening here. Maybe we'll have a little cutscene, and cutscenes will have errors and things will pop in and out and textures will be weird. And it's like, it's good enough. They get it. And in animation, an art medium that's been around for decades and decades and decades, that's not going to cut it. It's not going to cut it the same way it cut it in video games in 2000. Any more words on that, John?
No, I mean, that pretty much sums it up. I don't want to just dunk on the animation, because I know it's a new team.
It's tough.
And I know they were trying, because like I said, the producers have made some schlocky stuff, but the people there have made good stuff. Like I said, the Gun Frontier anime was really good. And then the even like the Queen Emeraldas OVA, although that was a little earlier, I was watching that, and that's a pretty decent OVA.
Yeah, and some 3D animation there too. And I almost wonder, like, the 3D animation, like they're in the middle of this, like, I guess, downward bell curve of 3D animation cost. And like, I can only imagine the difference between 1998 3D and 2001 3D were probably pretty significantly different.
Mm-hmm,
so sure. I would imagine, like, that's why we only get 4 episodes of Queen Emeraldas, because that had to have been a lot of the budget. And then let's talk a little bit about the music. I think the music hits all the classic Leiji Matsumoto buttons. It's very stirring. It's well composed too, for the most part. Even when it gets a little synthy for some of the OST tracks, I think it's generally pretty good. There's a few errors here and there. The Book of Life at the end has this weird cue going into the chorus that's a little offbeat. Long ago, somewhere in the future. I don't know if anybody else notices this, but I'm a musician. I'm constantly like listening for these awkward sounds and music, and it disappoints me so much, because it just seems like these little errors here and there are just, if we have to let them go. There's not enough money here. John, what did you think of the music?
I liked it. I think that the opening, it has like this Celtic orchestral theme kind of, and I thought that I really liked it, and I liked when they would implement it in episodes, especially during like fight scenes or something, when they'd play the theme. I thought it was great. I kind of wish they had, better visuals for that opening. I feel like it doesn't do the song justice, because a lot of it is just like PNGs of the characters over the music.
Yeah, it can be a little flat for sure.
The opening theme is actually an instrumental version of a very famous song called Jedi, also known as Time Goes Around. So perfect Matsumoto.
Yeah, Ring of Time.
And yeah, for me, it was really one of the highlights of Cosmo Warrior Zero is the soundtrack, because there's a lot of great themes in there. Most of the music was done by 2 violinists called Gemini Art High Quality. That's the name of the duo. They put the word high quality right in their band name. That's a marketing tactic right there. And I don't know if they ever did anything else actually. Basically the Cosmo Warrior Zero OST is their debut album. There are some tracks that are not even in the anime at all, but that's some things that go into sort of hip hop kind of territory. So it's very, very interesting OST to listen to, and it has like almost a Wu-Tang feeling with some clips of old movies being played in between the tracks, and so it's a very fun OST. And it was used very well. The music turned some sloppy scenes and manages to elevate it into a bit more emotional stuff. So they used the music really well to compensate.
So the music generally gets a thumbs up, even though it seems to have some of the splotches, some of the dirt that just this is not a polished series. If you only like your anime polished, stay away. But if you're willing to eat some grit and deal with that for the Leijiverse. In terms of modern storytelling for Leiji Matsumoto, I think it's one of the tops, at least in anime.
And it has a giant kaiju cow. So how can you say no to that?
Big beef Angus. We'll see. I want to talk about plot now. We only got about 45 minutes here. You know, if you've seen our other movie reviews, I'll go beat by beat throughout the entire movie. Unfortunately, we can't do that with 15 episodes. And I want to talk about the plot of the first 13 episodes so we can get to talk a little bit about the last 2 episodes, which is the Gaiden, the little cluster there. So I've got, notes for about the first 6 episodes. We'll see how far we can get into this. I really want to talk about the first episode, though. If we can kind of hit the main beats of the first episode, that'll give you a good idea of what's going on here. So episode 1, we start out with a flashback to Warrius Zero having those it seems like it's more of a PTSD flashback than it is an actual reenactment of this war that's been going on between which are implied to be, it seems, the Metanoids, but they're constantly referred to as the Machine Men in this series. And
basically, the Machine Men are working for or being manipulated by the Metanoids. Metanoids are not Machine Men, but they are pulling their strings, basically.
Right, and that's why they kind of want to eliminate life through this mechanization process. And we get this voice acting in the beginning that unfortunately is a bit cringe. At least in the American version. I don't know about the French dub. Maybe Warrius's Zero's cries during this PTSD flashback are a little more tolerable, but we got a lot of like voice cracking, like, please. It's like really forced. It loses a lot of emotion. John, did you watch the sub or the dub?
I watched the dub, but I would jump to the sub for certain scenes to see how it was handled. And so I did watch the Crispin Freeman dub, and he's a great voice actor. And,
a lot of it's really good.
And it's just that like whenever he has to be, he can do cool, he can do calm and in control, he can do tough. And then it's like when he has to be insecure, he just like, it's like, whoa, it's like, what are you doing? Stop it. My kids.
Yeah, it's a little rough sometimes. So it's not bad voice acting, but for a character that is really insecure at the front, kind of cringe to that VA occasionally. I don't know if they did a better job in the France. Well, did you watch the sub? I'm guessing you just watched the sub, or did you watch the French?
I watched both, basically.
The French dub as well. What did you think of the Zero dub?
In French, the dub was actually pretty good. Zero is very good. Marina is very good. And they managed to keep the same voices on all the series. For instance, Maetel has the same voice actress in this and in Space Symphony Maetel. Same for Emeraldas. So you really have this. It's not the same actors as in the 70s and the 80s, but for this sort of time period, you have at least the same cast on all the Matsumoto shows. So that's pretty nice. Arloc and Tochiro are a point of debate among the fan base.
Okay.
Because, well, the original Arloc voice actor in the 70s, Richard
right. In France.
Like a legendary voice actor.
He's Han Solo, no?
He's Han Solo. He's basically all Harrison Ford roles. He's Indiana Jones. He's everyone.
So they couldn't get him back for Cosmo Warrior Zero. No. That's rough. That's real rough.
And they have an actor called Eric Peter, who is, he's a good actor, but he approached this as sort of trying to be Clint Eastwood. It works, especially in Gun Frontier, but it's very different. It's almost a bit more exaggerated than the original Arloc voice. So some people really don't like it. And Tochiro has this very cringy kind of voice in French, like Arloc. And again, it works in Gun Frontier very well because it fits with a sort of zany atmosphere they went through. But in more serious a series such as Cosmo Warrior Zero or Space Symphony Maetel, it is a bit cringy, yeah.
Yeah.
So these two are really the characters where, especially because they're such beloved characters, fans tend to have a sort of love-hate feelings for them.
That makes sense. I will say the only old guard voice actor that I miss is the Maetel from the 3-9 movies that we get in America. I really love her voice, and this Maetel is doesn't really hit it for me the same way. This Maetel, we'll just talk about her real quick, is super emo. Like super, like way more over dramatic. I don't know if maybe in the manga she gets to this level of emo.
I thought that the emo was very fitting for the tone. And I thought that it was weird that they used her instead of just making a new character.
Just kind of like fan service.
Yeah, like it's like okay, because they already did like Harlock, where like they kind of used him as a crux a bit, and it's like, oh, now you have to bring in Maetel.
Do you though? Yeah, I can see that.
But if you see the anime as being meant as a spin-off of Galaxy Express manga, you kind of get why they had to put Maetel somewhere.
She travels through time, like that's her thing, and so she kind of gets to be forced into every Leijiverse thing after you watch enough of them. So that's
there's a very interesting theory about the colors of her outfits in the series, which in Maetel Legend she has a white outfit because she's
and that's her first, right? So she's got like that's a purity, I would assume,
she's pure, she's innocent,
right?
In Cosmo Warrior Zero, which would be probably chronologically a second outfit, she's blue because she's basically she has these emotions. She's overwhelmed by the sadness of discovering how bad things are out there, basically.
I thought that Space Symphony Maetel's red would be the second because that's the direct follow-up to Maetel Legend. Yeah, and that's kind of like the blood on her hands of what's going on there.
Space Symphony Maetel, it's always complicated with Leijiverse to know exactly where everything fits. But it starts, the very first scene starts by saying that there was a war between Machine Man and Earth. And Maetel goes back home after that. So it kind of hints that refers to Cosmo Warrior Zero, maybe, of what we've seen there. But yeah, we never know. But the red is basically the blood, of course, and also the determination, because that's where she decides to fight, basically. And then later, much later, we don't know how long after that, she's in black because she has basically become deaf in a way. She has taken all these young men to their demise.
There's a lot of like mourning there too. I would say, like the black, the widow in black.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the fact that she's much more emotional in Cosmo Warrior Zero than we used to, it's tied to the fact that she has a blue outfit and it's to hint that it takes place at a certain moment in her life where she is not quite, just like you have young Arloc and young Emeraldas and so on. She's not quite the Maetel that we'll know later. She's still finding herself, basically.
Maetel may be her own episode, and that's probably the case here. It just came to mind. So we'll have to do a deep dive on Maetel at some point. But after this kind of Zero's sort of cringy whining about his PTSD, he's going and he's leaving some flowers in this big hole in the ground, and he pulls out what we see time and time again, this locket. It's got a picture of his wife and his little girl that's apparently is able to track them. So he had locators on his wife and child, which is interesting there. And it just beeps lost. And he's like, yeah, I guess they are still dead. And he throws, but before this, he gets hit by a rock. And this turns out to be just his imagination playing out like 8 people just berating him. Like 3 children come up and they go, "Where's my mommy? Where's my dad?" And his grandma starts whacking him with a cane. And she goes, "Where's my son? He died in the war." And everybody's sad and mad at him because he represents the military force that couldn't stop them. But we quickly find out they all disappeared. This is just him hating himself. a
And
lot.
It's actually something from Matsumoto's father, who came back from the war with the grief of all people who died under his command. And I think here Zero is basically Matsumoto's father returning from the war.
Did Matsumoto's father like have these confrontations with people?
I don't know, but I know that he was basically, he had to go to all the families of the pilots who were serving under him, and he had to tell them, I failed them. They were under my orders, and they died. So I think there's a bit of that in that scene.
John, you said this was one of the most major displays of PTSD that we get, and so you felt these scenes were maybe a bit lacking, or what did you think about this? Like, this is some of the bulk of the PTSD.
They always seem to just come out of nowhere, like with no subtlety and like no nuance, and it always just feels like we're in a scene, hard cut, now everyone is being extreme. It just felt like there needed to be more context. There needed to be like some, play it out a little better.
Yeah,
I feel like the execution, you could really make something like that powerful, and I felt like it's one of those things where, as a viewer who isn't thinking about this as critically as you might be,
just not inundated. We've seen the Machine Man War for decades and decades. We get it.
Yeah,
we might actually go, oh, I don't want to see the people getting slaughtered. I don't need that setup. Let's just get to the misery. But it makes perfect sense that somebody like you would need it more.
Yeah, well, I'd watch it, and it's just like, whoa, where? And it's like it's hard to follow for like someone who's just sitting down to watch it.
And so basically we get the story here. The machine men have won against the humans. There's been a peace treaty that allies these opposing forces. And we cut to Zero leading a training exercise aboard this new ship where they're forcing something there and they're failing the exercise. He's pushing it too hard. And they're like, Captain, we should probably chill these engines or else like everybody's going to die over a training exercise. And somebody's like, the ship can't take it. He goes, you can't take it. And it's like very, you can't handle the truth sort of deal. Or, it's got that kind of vibe to it. Zero doesn't seem fit to serve at this point. I believe it's Nohara, this older, wizened crew member who sits on the bridge constantly. He's like, bro, you need to take a break, like right now. And he follows him out, and all of a sudden he's wearing a hat. And he turns to him, and Zero's like, you know what? I'm just going to quit the army. And honestly, seems like a good idea at this point. Like, Zero is not faring well throughout this. And Nohara's like, you know what? Would you take off your hat for a second? Like, okay, like, great. Now we can talk to each other man to man. And he just backs up and clocks him. But John, you had a funny tweet.
Everyone in this show punches like I punch in a dream.
Yeah, and maybe that's it's like they're in space, much like being in space. Everything is a bit weightless, right? And I think maybe that's what you're commenting on. This animation doesn't really have the weight that it needs for a punch to feel
even
like
when
a real punch.
And this is skipping ahead a little bit, but even when they go to Gun Frontier, there's a fight between it was her name Sylvie or Sylvana? Sylviana. There's a short fight between Sylviana and Harlock, and it's just very like we drew a fist and we're gonna pan it across, and then we're gonna go back and forth.
Yeah, it's weightless, right? I mean, Am I wrong? Yeah, there's some difficulty there, and they only have so many frames, and they don't seem to know what to do with it. Yeah, it's tough. It's not impossible to make a punch feel weighty with just a few frames. They did it with Tomorrow's Joe. No, those punches felt real for the kids to be like so excited about that. Series.
And that's something that I find frustrating, is that there's been so many profound anime that have utilized limited animation. I mean, the entire medium is based around limited animation,
right? And
there's so much that you can look at and say, okay, this is how they did this. We need to do this. Especially, I remember an animator, an internet animator who's American, saying like, there's no reason to have poor limited animation in a world where we can reference Fooly Cooly. Because like, if you look at something like that, it's all limited animation and it's all like really hard impact. And I don't know, that may have been like, I think that was a year after Zero, or maybe the same year it started. But like, there were people who could pull off stuff like that with limited animation. And I think that just comes back to the team being inexperienced and being so new.
Or just never really coming into their own. Again, there are a couple old heads here who just, they never really hit the same chops. And I guess if you had a project like Fooly Cooly and you were Gynax in the early 2000s, you knew who to get, and everyone else got the leftovers. And so we get more punching. Zero punching this punching bag. Weak, dirty coward. And he hates himself, and he's just taking it all out on this punching bag, but he's really taking it out on himself. And more of this kind of, it's not as cringy as the opening, but he's definitely, Crispin Freeman's struggling a little bit to feel insecure. And they get an SOS, and Captain Harlock is aboard what's called the Death Shadow, is attacking a cargo ship. And this is an interesting little note here. They do mention the Arcadia later, and it seems like they're confused sometimes if the Arcadia is out or not. But the Death Shadow is basically just the original Arcadia from the 78 series, but green. It looks pretty cool.
It was green in the manga.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, where was it illustrated as green? Was it on one of the covers, or I have the 7 Seas?
There are a few colored plates or pages, which are in the. They reprinted them in color in the most recent edition in Japan.
Okay.
But I had the chance to actually see the original page. And actually, it was really green.
I didn't know that.
I think at some point Matsumoto maybe Dr. Serial Nishioka, being such a Matsumoto nerd, said, let's go back to green.
Yeah. So I guess Rintaro having his own vision for the Arcadia back in 78. And so Zero and Harlock are having their first contention here right in episode 1. Zero not yet on his ship. He's on what's called the Mirage. Zero's like, hey, surrender. And Harlock's like, we're going to fire a shot without any automated things. So we're going to do a complete manual shot and graze you, which pretty impressive, I guess, for space battle. And that's Yadaran, I believe, making that shot. Let's talk a little bit about Yadaran here. Maybe he was blonde in the original too, because we got a blonde Yadaran. And he seems a little less interested. They'll show him with his own model ship, but he's never like resisting orders. He doesn't really have his own autonomy here. I mean, John, are you more familiar with maybe the Harlock manga or the old Harlock animes?
I've seen a decent amount of the Harlock anime and I have the first volume of the manga. And I was kind of surprised because it feels like whenever Yadaran's on screen, no one else is acknowledging that he's there. There's like one scene where they're like, I feel like there was Harlock and Yadaran were on a monitor, and someone says, we need to get, look out, it's Harlock and Tochiro. And it's like, Tochiro is not in that shot. That is Yadaran. Kay is not there at all. Like, she's not on the show.
She's not there yet. I mean, she's very young, I believe, in the manga. So, and this is young Harlock, but again, we're kind of like getting a world where Yadaran and Tochiro exist, and they're both kind of fighting for this role in Harlock's life, and Tochiro is winning no contest.
Of course, yeah.
In French, especially in the SSX series, there was a confusion. The French dub calls Tochiro with Yadaran's name from the previous series. Small guy with glasses. It must be the same guy, right?
Right.
So it's funny to see actually both of them fighting for this spot.
They never even talk to each other, which is also weird.
As a French viewer, you feel like, yeah, it's almost acknowledging the fact that they were confused before.
Yeah, and they never even talk to each other in this series. It's almost like they have an unspoken rivalry. Like, Yadaran behind the scenes is like, great, Tochiro's on screen again, fucking pervert. He's like not happy about it. And then Tochiro's just totally aloof to it, like, yeah, I'm Harlock's best friend. I'm not. Who are you again? Harlock's like, we don't harm terrestrials, and like this is implying humans. Harlock's only interested in destroying the machine men here, and it ends up with, like I said earlier, Zero and Harlock playing a game of chicken, where the Mirage is such a piece of shit, and basically, maybe it's implying here like the Earth forces aren't getting like really good equipment here. And even the Karyu, which gets fixed up later, like not that great. It's constantly having these vessel issues here. And they're always struggling to keep up with Harlock. They fail. Harlock swings by, disables their cannons. Harlock sinks this cargo ship full of machine men. But basically, this turns into the chair. I think they're just called the chairman, even though they're a woman. So we were saying chairwoman, but I think they're always referred to as chairman. Says, Zero, you've got to kill Harlock. Harlock is threatening the treaty with Earth that we have because he's only targeting the machine men, and Earth can't control its rogue human. So if you don't take care of this, everybody is fucked. And Zero's like, all right, well, you got to give me the Karyu back. And the chairman, after this, we get our first inkling that there's like a higher up the chain person who's kind of pulling the strings. There's a little dialogue there. John, how did you feel about the intrigue in this? Going along episode to episode, did you feel like you were being strung along properly, like as a shonen should string you along, or were you kind of like forcing yourself through episodes?
I was definitely forcing myself through some of these episodes. Yeah, especially, and you know, there's a lot of things. It could just be that the animation doesn't engross you. It could be that the dub, you know, the performances aren't that great. And you know, a lot of the voice actors went on to do better stuff. This was pretty early on for them. It was, you know, dubbed in 2001. But yeah, it took me a few episodes to really understand who these characters were, what each of them wanted. Yeah, with the animation being the way it is, that's what I struggled to get past, was just you know, overlooking a lot of that stuff. Once they got into Gun Frontier, it felt like, okay, we have a plot, we have an arc, and you can see where we're going with this. And I was like, okay, those episodes were a bit easier to get through.
5 and 6. So yeah, and we can talk a little bit about 5 and 6. Because we also get Sylviana in here, who seems to be one of the things that people really like about Cosmo Warrior Zero is Sylviana. Sylviana is literally only in, I think, these 2 episodes, but she's this female bounty hunter that confronts Tochiro, where we have this very archetypical scene in Leiji Matsumoto's history that's a bit flipped, where Tochiro walks into a bar, this short character that's cloaked and in this long brim hat, and asks for a glass of milk. And this happens time and time again. It happens in SSX. It happens in Galaxy Express. It happens in Harlock. And you know, maybe somebody's getting some milk dumped on them eventually, but Tochiro doesn't get beat up by a bunch of men like in a few different ones. He actually whips out a sword this time. And this is where we get Tochiro with the most autonomy that he's ever really had in any of the series, at least as an action character, besides maybe Gun Frontier. But that's just, I guess, leaving out Gun Frontier, it's one of his strongest, because we actually get the genius Tochiro that makes all the cool ships.
And actually, the scene as it appears in Cosmo Warrior Zero is quite close to the one from the Queen Emeraldas manga, where actually one of the people who taunt Tochiro is a woman. It's not La Sylviana, but it's not just a bunch of dudes bullying him. And actually, the Tochiro takes a sword and cuts their clothes to humiliate them in the streets. So
Sylviana dumps the milk on Tochiro, and she's the bounty hunter looking to collect on Tochiro, and he does the same to her, splits her clothes, and we don't see any boobie, but she's close, and she's being ogled and runs out. And Sylviana kind of, you know, it's not like we don't have any strong women in this anime. Mariana's a strong woman, even if she has problems. Emeraldas is about to Tochiro gets strung along by Sylviana in one scene, and he's gonna kind of give into his primal desires, and then he's strung up immediately thereafter because he let his guard down around the bounty hunter, which is a bad idea. And we have Emeraldas who comes by, and she's like, you can deal with it. John, how did you feel about you like these two episodes, and that's where we get the most famous Leijiverse trio, Harlock, Tochiro, Emeraldas. So you were a fan of these episodes?
Yeah, and like I said, my only real issue is that I would have loved to have seen Zero on the team doing these missions with them, where they're really like it finally feels like they're going on an adventure, and that's what I like to see. They're going somewhere they have a fun setting, they have a clear goal, they're getting involved with these other characters that we already know about, and I felt like it was probably one of the most well thought out episodes. Those two episodes were their most well thought out episodes of the series.
They go on and they have all this adventure, and we're really running out of time to talk about Cosmo Warrior Zero. But they do have a bit of an adventure. The Karyu's interesting to note because it's got this wave motion gun sort of equivalent, but it's got a different angle on it. You can control the beam, and there are these twin dragons that kind of fly around each other. Did you think that was cool, at least, John? I don't know.
I was actually surprised. I was going to go, oh, okay, they got a wave motion cannon, and I was happy that they actually did something a little different with it.
Yeah, unfortunately, we only get it for 2 episodes, which is kind of a bummer here. They go on, they have this big adventure in these first 13 episodes, but then we cut to episodes 14 and 15, and a lot of what you wanted, John, is given to here, except it's not very congruently put together.
It's a monkey's paw episode, if you would. On the historical context side, these 2 episodes are technically an OVA, 14 and 15. They came out after the series proper was finished. I believe they were actually released when the PlayStation game got a PC port. They were actually on the CD-ROM for the PC game. So they go to a planet that's a giant mushroom.
Yeah, Tochiro's planet.
They go to a planet that's a giant mushroom, and there's Zero is in prison, and he keeps getting bullied by these guys. And then meanwhile, Sylviana is on a planet that's a giant mushroom, and there's some pretty gross stuff happening. She eats the mushrooms from the guy's underwear.
Yeah, so let's talk about, do you know who that character is?
No, I don't.
So it's Nobota from Otoko Oidan, which was one of Matsumoto's big success in manga. But
it was his breakthrough manga, no? It was what really gave him stardom.
Kodansha Award for it. And it's a comedy manga about a penniless student coming to Tokyo from the countryside and having no money. So he ends up being forced at some point to eat the mushroom from his underwear
that grow on his underwear, his unwashed underwear.
And basically these 2 episodes are and I completely believe that they were tied to the video game PC ports, because they are based on an actual level from the video game. The Mushroom Planet with the inn is a sort of secret level you get in the video game, where you meet all these characters. You meet Matsumoto himself. All the scenes you have in the OVA basically are there, except you are playing as Zero, and you are going through these rooms and talking to these people. And so, I think they were really done for fun. They really were having a
fan
blast
service,
making this comedy. You see Emeraldas folding Tochiro's underwear, which is a scene you cannot unsee. and it's completely stupid, but for me it's always, as a Leijiverse fan, it's always very funny to watch them, because I of course I know all the references.
Right, and that's the thing, again and again with this, it was made completely, and it's seemingly only for people like Julian and I, who have done such a deep dive. We just want more and more of what we want, all the connections to be made. And for somebody, an onlooker like yourself, I mean, I can only imagine the bafflement that you felt while you were watching these. And it's called Gaiden. Is that an implication there?
I think it means side story.
Yeah.
Side story. Okay.
it's a way to say, okay, this is out of the continuity of the show. This is a bonus, basically. And there's actually, it's not well known, but there's actually another extra episode, which is not on the it's not on the French DVD box. I haven't seen it. I know it exists. It was a bonus on the Japanese DVD collection, and it was called Marina's Story. And it's an episode that basically tells the story of Marina Oki and what happened to her. And it reuses some of the stuff we see in the series, but apparently there's also some new scenes that shed some light on her life story, basically. I'd love to see that, but...
Yeah, I'm like, oh my God. And John's probably like, I could live with it.
But the worst they did was on the DVD box of Galaxy Railways, the second series. In Japan, there's 2 episodes that are exclusive to the DVD box and are actually the war against the metanoids. Like the big thing you've been waiting for 20 years in Matsumoto, and it's only on the Japanese DVD.
Oh, good.
That's like, you're kidding me.
John, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I did catch the Leiji Matsumoto insert into the and it's funny because they Akira Subaraya and that whole group, they did the Genma Wars anime, which was adapted from an Ishinomori manga. The earlier rendition of the Genma Wars manga was actually a co-production between Ishinomori and Kazumasa Hirai, who was a co-creator of 8-Man. And they did the same thing where they did a self-insert of Kazumasa Hirai, of all people, into the Genma Wars anime. And the way that they were much more nicer with Leiji Matsumoto, because in the Genma Wars anime, they actually kill him with a truck. they run him over. So I was expecting something like Leiji Matsumoto to come out and get caught in the crossfire or something.
Well, actually, Matsumoto has been a cameo in pretty much every animation that he's ever done.
Yeah,
I don't know.
He's always in a corner somewhere. Even if he's on manga, he likes to put himself somewhere. In Shinkiro Kitan, which is a very adult manga he did in the early 90s, he appears as a homeless person in the streets, like living in the garbage.
Yeah. He's also in the bar scene with Tochiro in Cosmo Warrior Zero. He's sitting by the door there. So I don't know if he's one of the first to do it. Obviously, he's got the tenure that he could be one of the first to do these self-inserts. He might have revolutionized putting yourself in your own anime and manga. I'm not quite sure. I don't know how.
Honestly, I do think Tezuka did that.
That would make sense.
So, and then I think, and it feels like everyone just kind of did that then, because I know Ishinomori does that too, where he puts himself in his manga. Sometimes he'll put himself subtly. Sometimes he'll just walk out and be like, "Hi, I'm the narrator, Shotaro."
Yeah, Matsumoto rarely talks though, so that's a different one in Cosmo Warrior Zero, where he actually interacts with Sylvana, and he's like, "I could use a hot girl in my manga." Yeah.
Does he actually have like an Osakan accent? Because in the dub they gave him like kind of like a southern, but also kind of like maybe it was more like a hippie accent. Did Leiji Matsumoto have a particular accent?
I think as he's from Kyushu, I think he probably has a Kyushuyan, I don't know how you say accent, but he has a very distinctive way of talking, and I don't think he dubs himself in Japanese, but I'm guessing the Japanese actor tried to mimic kind of Matsumoto's way of talking.
But way backtracking, we kept talking about Sylviana. Sylviana is interesting because she's kind of this portrayal of the worst traits of a woman. And she's up against Mariana and Emeraldas, who are very strong. And even the chairman has her own sort of redemption there. And basically, when she faces off against Harlock, she's like, well, she like pulls a knife on him in a fist fight. And she stops it and she's like, well, I couldn't win because I'm a woman and you're a man and you're stronger than I am. And then she backtracks and she's like, you know what? My makeup was running and I just don't feel like it today. And she's like she's like the anti-archetype, and you could see it as a bit sexist, but you could also see it as just like, well, he's got strong women what would you do? You're talking about archetypes. You put up what is a strong person, what does a weak person look like, and you contrast them for children. That makes some sense to me, but Sylviana still seems like people like her.
Well, it's a bit like Zero is an opposite of Arloc. In Cosmo Warrior Zero, one thing as a fan that I appreciate is that they put these characters that are not the usual Matsumoto types and have a bit of fun with them. So Sylviana is indeed not the best example of a female character personality-wise, but because there's this contrast with Emeraldas or mysterious Maetel types, it's something you don't see usually in the Leijiverse. So that's nice. And she gets redeemed, actually. It was a surprise, but in the Galaxy Express Ultimate Journey novels, so we talked about that already, but which are kind of the end of the story, basically. And at the end, when they're fighting the metanoids and they bring every character, they bring all their allies, even former enemies, because basically everyone needs to band together against this threat. And of all people, Emeraldas brings La Sylviana as an ally for this battle, which is very unexpected. But they were really saying, okay, so this is a big one. Everyone needs to show up, even like beat characters that you've forgotten about. They will show up anyway. And it's just like, considering where the series ends, it's funny to see La Sylviana arriving as basically Emeralda's friend. But yeah, it's a fun moment in the novels.
Interesting. John, I kind of led the journey the whole time. So if you have notes, you had things you wanted to say about Cosmo Warrior Zero, let it all out, please.
I don't have any particular notes, but I will say I am glad that you guys were able to get so much enjoyment out of it, because I was sitting through it going, I just like anytime there was something good, I was like, wasted potential. And then, but if you guys enjoyed it and you guys like it as much as you do, I think that's great. I am glad that someone had a positive experience with it.
And having, in the same slot, having watched some stuff like The Wild Seven or Gundam Musashi, Cosmo Warrior Zero is art.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I think you illustrate perfectly that for a Matsumoto fan, this can do a lot for you. For somebody who doesn't get it, there's just too many barriers to entry. This is something you're going to suggest to somebody that's already seen everything from Harlock 78 to the Queen Emeraldas OVA. And then you go, oh, maybe, you know what, if you can get through the bad animation, like you might like the story of Cosmo Warrior Zero. Beyond that, it's locked away and a lot of lost potential. I did learn a lot today, a lot of interesting perspectives. I really appreciated hearing more about, and this is why I wanted to bring you on, John, just because you know so much about anime in general and old school anime that you had so many great insights. I really appreciate you being with us. Anything you'd like to plug, even if we've already plugged it here at the end?
All I really have is my YouTube channel. It's just Mercury Falcon as one word. Go ahead and subscribe. I talk a lot about Tatsunoko anime as well as Ishinomori works, manga, tokusatsu, anime adaptations, as well as just general anime history things.
And I'll cut it out if you want me to, but I also say he's got a Patreon and a Ko-Fi if you end up liking his stuff. Definitely,
absolutely don't cut that out. For my videos, and this is one of the selling points is that I import a lot of books and I get a lot of books translated. So I am constantly investing in my own work. So
and the community, you're investing in the community.
That's what I think. And if you basically sign up for the Patreon, you have access to my translations. I always post them for patrons. So you get like a bunch of lists where it's like,
awesome.
Here's the books and here's the passages and here's what I've translated, interviews, and even stuff that didn't make it into videos. Sometimes I'll get translated and then go, you know what? I don't need that. So there might be something there that I didn't cover that you might like.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely go check out the YouTube and then kick them a buck or two. Julien, of course, what would you like to plug here at the end?
Well, as usual, I will plug my pen and paper role-playing game, Law and Legacy, science fantasy, weird planet, adventure, magic, and science. And now it's available in English since this summer. So yeah, check it out if you like tabletop RPGs that are not Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Maybe you like it. The quick start guide is free, so just have a look.
Can't lose anything. Yeah. If you're a fan of science fantasy, which if you're a Leijiverse person, yeah, it might hit some of those same buttons. Not 1-to-1, of course, but you may like it. And of course, you run triple-9.fr, which defaults in French, but you can get it easily translated to English. I use it constantly for facebook.com/Leijiverse, where we were broadcasting live. But of course, like Leijiverse on Facebook, and I'm Captain Harlock. I do some raps about the Leijiverse from time to time. Go check out the Leijiverse's Volume 1 Friend Spaceship, a very rap-styled telling of Arloc and Tochiro, and hopefully more to come in the near future. I was working on some beats with that Queen Melania soundtrack, and I got some like old school like R&B-ish vibe coming out of these Kitaro samples. So I'll look forward to something cool in the future. Thank you all so much. I sign out with Harlock's salute here. I thank you all for supporting. Go check us out on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the like, subscribe for more. And again, thank you guys. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
See ya.